Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be discussing the infamous worst serial killer Iceberg. Prepare yourselves, cause I guarantee that at the end of this video you will be shocked by the things discussed. But before we go on, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks guys. Now for the sake of keeping this video short and sweet, we are going to be covering first 4 levels today and another 4 levels on Saturday. Number 1. Charles Manson. Charles Manson was an infamous American cult leader and criminal who on August 9, 1969 organized the murders of director Roman Polanski's pregnant wife Sharon Tate along with her friends Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski and Stephen Parent in Los Angeles, California. The killers, also known as the Manson family, claimed that they were brainwashed by Charles to follow him and commit these horrible acts. Manson was sentenced to life in prison and died in 2017. Number 2. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer and cannibal who killed and dismembered 17 young males from 1978 to 1991. Many of his later killings involved necrophilia and cannibalism. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and in 1994 he was beaten to death by a schizophrenic inmate named Christopher Scarver. Number 3. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was an American serial killer, kidnapper and rapist who was sentenced to 2 death sentences for killing 20 young women from 1974 to 1978. Although his true kill count is unknown and it might be as high as 36 plus. He was executed by electric chair in the Florida State Prison in 1989. Number 4. Son of Sam. Son of Sam, or the 44 caliber killer, real name David Berkovich, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York City from 1976 to 1977, killing 6 people and wounding 7 others. He would taunt police with letters, claiming to receiving orders from his neighbor's dog named Sam, whom he believed to be a demon, hence the name Son of Sam. David was arrested in 1977 and sentenced to 6 life sentences. He is in prison to this day. Number 5. Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, or the Night Stalker, was a serial killer operating in Los Angeles, California from 1984 to 1985. He would sneak inside his victims' home late at night, rape and murder them. He was also a practicing Satanist and a cocaine user. Richard was arrested in 1985 and in 1989 sentenced to death for 14 murders. He never expressed remorse and in 2013 died from B-cell lymphoma while awaiting his execution. And that brings us to level 2 of this iceberg. Number 6. Henry Lee Lucas. Henry Lee Lucas was a serial killer active from 1960 to 1983. A drifter, Henry endured a very tough childhood, given that his prostitute mother would constantly beat him and even make him watch her performing sexual acts with other men. He committed matricide, aka killing his own mother, in late 1959 and embarked on a killing spree with his partner in crime, Otis Toole. Upon his arrest in 1983, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for 3 murders, although he claimed the number was 250 plus murders, earning him the nickname the Confession Killer. He died of congestive heart failure in 2001. Number 7. Albert Fish. Albert Fish, or the Brooklyn Vampire, was a violent killer who between 1924 and 1932 committed at least 3 child murders in the state of New York. He would perform horrific torture upon them before finally ending their lives, usually by strangulation. Albert would then cannibalize their bodies. He would sometimes even send letters to the victims' families, explaining in detail his horrific acts. He was arrested in 1932 and executed by means of electric chair in 1936. Number 8. Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper is an American serial killer who murdered 8 women from 1972 to 1973. Most of them were co-eds, giving him the name the Co-ed Killer or the Co-ed Butcher. 2 of those 8 victims were also his abusive mother and her best friend. But his killings didn't start in the 70s. In the year 1964, at the age of just 15 years old, Ed killed both of his grandparents. The murders for which he got 5 years in a maximum security mental hospital. In 1969, Kemper was deemed cured and released to the outside world. His second arrest was in 1973 and was sentenced to life in prison. He is still alive and still incarcerated to this day. Number 9. Peter Sutcliffe. Peter, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, was an English serial killer who between 1975 and 1980 murdered 13 women in the West Yorkshire area. Due to the brutality and savagery of his crimes, a criminal psychologist characterized him as extremely callous, sexually sadistic serial killer. He was arrested in 1981 and sentenced to life in prison. He died in 2020 due to COVID infection. Number 10. Ed Gein. Ed Gein was an American murderer and suspected serial killer, also known as the Plainfield Ghoul. He would also dig up bodies from the cemeteries and fashioned keepsakes from their bones and skin. Ed was arrested in 1957 for 2 counts of murder and 9 counts of mutilation of corpses, although he was suspected of 7 other murders, which would make him a serial killer. Gein was declared insane and sentenced to life in a mental health institute. He died in 1984. Due to the nature of his crimes, he would inspire many movies, most notably the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and its remakes. And that leads us to level 3. Number 11. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. The two were a serial killer couple responsible for murdering 5 children in and around Manchester, England between 1963 and 1965. Known by the media as the Moors murders, it was reported that at least 4 of them were essayed. They were charged with 3 of these murders and both received life sentences. Myra died in prison in 2002 at the age of 60 and Ian died 15 years later in 2017 aged 79. Number 12. Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo, or the Butcher of Rostov, was one of the most prolific serial killers in Russian history. His reign of terror spanned between 1978 and 1990. Mostly in the Russian town of Rostov-on-Don, he would lure usually young girls into secluded areas to then take advantage of them and later murder them, usually by stabbing. He was arrested in 1990 and executed by shooting in 1994. If you are interested in knowing more about him, check my latest video. Number 13. Dean Carl. Dean was a monster who murdered 28 plus young men between 1970 and 1973. He was also nicknamed the Candyman, given that he operated a candy factory located in Houston, Texas. What makes him incredibly disturbing is that he brainwashed 2 dysfunctional young men to be his accomplices in his murders and horrific tortures that he would inflict upon those kids. In 1973, fed with Carl's unhinged methods of torture and violence, one of his accomplices, Elmer Wayne Hanley, would shoot Dean, ending his life, ending the terror that were the Houston Heights murders. Number 14. Richard Chase. Richard Chase was an American serial killer nicknamed the Vampire of Sacramento due to be prone of drinking his victims' blood. As a child, he possessed all 3 characteristics of the McDonald triad, which are obsessive bedwetting, arson, and cruelty towards animals. His problems only worsened as the years passed, to the point that he was drinking animal remains mixed with Coca-Cola in a blender, smoothie style. In 1977, he started doing the same thing, but to humans. In that time span, between 1977 and 1978, he murdered 6 people in very, very violent ways before drinking their blood and cannibalizing their remains. Richard was arrested in 1978 and committed suicide in 1980. Number 15. X-Man of New Orleans. Not much is known about this monster, other than that he was an unidentified serial killer operating in New Orleans, Louisiana from 1918 to 1919. He would sneak into victims' homes, usually Italian-American minorities, and wipe out entire families, usually with an axe or razor. His confirmed kill count is 6, but it could be way higher. Now let's descend to the level 4. Number 16. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. The two were a sadistic serial killer duo responsible for murdering from 11 to 25 victims at a remote cabin owned by Leonard. A schizophrenic, he was obsessed with survivalism and learned to live that way, in that cabin, away from the outside world. He met Charles Ng in either 1980 or 1981, and they soon started their sadistic killing spree, burying their victims' bodies under the cabin. Leonard was arrested in 1985 for unrelated charges, but he didn't know that, so fearing prosecution, he committed suicide by swallowing cyanide pills in his prison cell. Charles was arrested later and their torture chamber was discovered. He is serving a life sentence. Number 18. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, otherwise known as the Schoolgirl Killers, were a couple with very dark and twisted fantasies. Paul endured a very tough childhood due to his father going to prison for SA. He started developing violent sexual fantasies that he would try on women. But he met a woman who was into it, Karla Homolka. Karla shared his dark fantasies and would even encourage him. Between 1987 and 1990, they would commit 3 murders, one of them being Karla's own sister Tammy. They were both arrested and tried. Paul was sentenced to life in prison, and Karla was shockingly released in 2005. Number 19. Herbert Mullen. Herbert was a very mentally ill man who believed that if he would kill enough people in the state of California, he would prevent a massive earthquake. As a child, he was described as bright and popular, but after his best friend's death, he started abusing LSD and cannabis, worsening his already developing schizophrenia. His murder spree lasted from 1972 to 1973, killing 11 people total. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and died in there in 2022. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And stay tuned for part 2 coming this Saturday, as we are going to be descending even deeper. And I will see you Saturday.